They wanted aid, but Earth sent a fleet that doesn't do peace part. 1. The desperate call. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been going on for 6 hours. An Ambassador Zeph Corral of the Krillian Federation could feel his hope dying. With each passing moment, around the massive circular chamber, representatives from 47 different species sat in their designated seats, their faces showing everything from mild concern to complete indifference. The holographic display in the center of the room showed the horrifying truth that had brought them all here. The Nexari Empire had launched a full-scale invasion of Krillian space, and they were winning. Zeph's forearms trembled as he stood before the assembly once more, his blue skin pale with exhaustion and fear. The Krillians were a peaceful people. Their technology focused on art, science, and healing rather than warfare. They had never built weapons of mass destruction, never developed military fleets, never even conceived that someone might want to simply destroy them for the joy of destruction. But the Nexari Empire was different. They were conquerors, raiders, and murderers who had swept through 12 systems in the past month, leaving nothing but ash and silence in their wake. Honored delegates, Zeph began, his voice cracking with emotion. I stand before you not just as a representative of my people, but as perhaps the last voice of 3 billion souls who face extinction. The Nexari have taken our outer colonies. They have burned our cities. They have enslaved our children. Our remaining fleet numbers fewer than 200 ships. While intelligence reports suggest the Nexari have brought over 5,000 vessels to our sector, the chamber remained eerily quiet. A few delegates whispered among themselves, but most simply stared at the tactical display showing the inexorable advance of the Nexari fleet toward the Krillian homeworld. The red markers representing enemy ships looked like a disease spreading across the star map, consuming everything in their path. We do not ask for your fleets, Zeph continued, desperation creeping into his voice. We do not ask for your weapons. We ask only for aid, medical supplies for our wounded, transport ships for our civilians, food for our refugees, anything that might help us save some fragment of our civilization before it is lost forever. The response was exactly what Zeph had expected, and exactly what he had feared. The Altarian representative, a tall, crystalline being whose voice chimed like musical bells, was the first to speak. The Altarian Collective expresses our deepest sympathies for your situation. We will immediately begin organizing a cultural preservation project to document your species' artistic achievements before they are lost. The vegan delegate, a creature that looked like a cross between a tree and a spider, rustled its branch-like appendages. The vegan harmonies will compose a song of mourning for your people. Your sacrifice will be remembered in our ceremonies for generations to come. One by one, the other species offered their thoughts, their prayers, their sympathy, and their regret. But not one of them offered actual help. Not one of them was willing to risk their own ships, their own soldiers, their own resources to save the Krillians. The galaxy's great powers had become comfortable, complacent, and utterly unwilling to dirty their hands with the messy business of stopping genocide. The Nexari Empire had calculated this perfectly. They had chosen to attack the Krillians precisely because they knew no one would intervene. The Krillians were too weak to matter, too few to be missed, and too isolated to be strategically important. It was a perfect crime, and everyone in the chamber knew it. Zeph felt tears streaming down his face as he realized the truth. His people would die alone, forgotten, while the galaxy's great civilizations watched from a safe distance and offered their condolences. He was preparing to transmit one final message to his homeworld, one last goodbye to his family. when something unexpected happened. The chamber's communications officer, a young Terran whose species had only recently joined the council, suddenly straightened in his seat. "Sir, we're receiving a priority transmission from the outer system. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace." The tactical display flickered and updated, showing new contacts appearing at the edge of the Krillian system. But these weren't the sleek, organic curves of Nexari vessels. These were something else entirely. Massive, angular ships that looked like they had been built for only one purpose. The computer struggled to count them all, the number climbing steadily as more and more vessels materialized from hyperspace. "How many?" Zeph asked, hardly daring to hope. "Still counting, sir. Current tally is 347 vessels. No, wait. More are arriving. 400, 500. Sir, I'm reading over 800 ships now, and they're still coming." The chamber erupted in confusion. Delegates demanded to know whose fleet had arrived, while others frantically tried to contact their homeworlds to see if they had secretly dispatched aid. But Zeph knew the truth before anyone else, because he recognized the angular, predatory design of those ships from the intelligence briefings he had studied obsessively for the past month. "They're human," he whispered, and then louder, "They're human ships." The room fell silent. Everyone knew about the humans, of course. They were the newest member of the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 years ago. They were considered primitive by most standards, their technology crude, their diplomacy unsophisticated. They had been admitted to the council more as a courtesy than because anyone believed they had anything meaningful to contribute. But now, as the tactical display showed over 1,000 human vessels taking position throughout the Krillian system, everyone was forced to reconsider their assumptions. This wasn't a small aid mission or a token gesture of support. This was a full battle fleet, larger than anything the Krillians had ever seen. Larger than what most species could muster, even if they stripped every ship from their home defenses. "Have they responded to our communications?" Zeph asked, his heart pounding. "No, sir. They're maintaining complete communications silence, but they're positioning themselves between the Nexari fleet and our homeworld." The implications were staggering. The humans hadn't sent diplomats or negotiators. They hadn't offered conditional aid or demanded concessions. They had simply arrived with enough firepower to challenge the Nexari Empire directly, and they were placing themselves squarely in the path of the invasion. The Nexari response was swift and predictable. Within hours, their fleet commanders were broadcasting threats and demands across all frequencies. War Leader Thaxon himself, the butcher who had personally overseen the destruction of the Krillian colonies, appeared on the main view screen. He was a massive creature, covered in natural armor plating, with 4 arms that ended in razor-sharp claws and a mouth full of teeth designed for tearing flesh. "Unknown vessels," Thaxon snarled, his voice carrying the arrogance of a predator who had never been challenged. "You are interfering with a lawful military operation. The Krillian Federation has been marked for absorption into the Nexari Empire. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." For 12 hours, the human fleet remained silent. They took no aggressive action, made no threats, and offered no explanations. They simply held their position, a wall of steel and determination between the Nexari and their intended victims. The tension in the Krillian system was unbearable, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Then, exactly 24 hours after their arrival, the humans finally responded. But their message didn't go to the Nexari fleet. Instead, it was broadcast on all frequencies, to every ship in the system, to every world in the sector, and to the Galactic Council itself. The voice that spoke was calm, professional, and absolutely cold. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Federation Fleet. We have reviewed the tactical situation in this system and have reached a conclusion. The Nexari Empire has 72 hours to withdraw all forces from Krillian space and return all captured personnel and materials. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. This is a statement of fact." The transmission continued, and Admiral Chen's voice remained steady and matter-of-fact, as if she were reading a weather report rather than delivering an ultimatum to one of the galaxy's most feared military powers. If Nexari forces remain in this system after the deadline expires, they will be removed by force. If they attempt to harm any Krillian civilians or infrastructure during their withdrawal, they will be removed by force. If they attempt to negotiate, delay, or bargain, they will be removed by force. There was a brief pause, and when Admiral Chen spoke again, her voice carried a note of finality that made everyone who heard it shiver. "The Terran Federation does not engage in humanitarian interventions. We do not believe in peacekeeping missions. We do not negotiate with slavers, murderers, or genocidal empires. When we respond to a call for aid, we respond with a solution. The Nexari Empire has 72 hours to become part of that solution, or to become part of the problem that gets solved." The transmission ended, leaving the Krillian system in stunned silence. In the Galactic Council chamber, delegates stared at each other in shock and growing horror. The humans hadn't come to help negotiate a peaceful resolution. They hadn't come to provide humanitarian aid or to evacuate refugees. They had come to end the war, one way or another. War leader Thaxon's response was immediate and predictable. His image appeared on screens throughout the system, his massive form trembling with rage. "Primitive mammals, you dare threaten the Nexari Empire. We have conquered 47 worlds. We have enslaved entire species. We will tear your pathetic ships apart and use your bones to decorate our victory halls." But even as Thaxon raged and threatened, something had changed in the system. The Nexari fleet, which had been advancing steadily toward the Krillian homeworld, had stopped. For the first time in the entire campaign, they had encountered something that gave them pause. Ambassador Zeph watched the tactical display with growing amazement and terror. The human fleet had arranged itself in a formation he had never seen before, each ship positioned with mathematical precision to create overlapping fields of fire that would turn the space around the Krillian homeworld into a killing field. These weren't the scattered, improvised positions of a species learning to fight. This was the work of people who had studied war the way his people studied art, who had turned destruction into a science. As the 72-hour deadline approached, both fleets held their positions. The Nexari continued to issue threats and demands, while the humans maintained their absolute silence. In the Galactic Council chamber, emergency sessions continued around the clock as delegates tried to understand what they were witnessing. Some called for immediate intervention to prevent a catastrophic war. Others argued that the humans should be ordered to withdraw before they started a conflict that could spread across the galaxy. But Zeph knew the truth that none of them wanted to admit. The war had already started the moment the Nexari had decided to exterminate his people. The humans hadn't come to prevent a conflict. They had come to finish one asterisk when peace isn't an option. The 72-hour deadline expired at exactly 0800 hours, Terran Standard Time. War leader Thaxon had spent the final hours broadcasting increasingly desperate threats. But the human fleet had remained as silent as the grave. Then, at 0801 hours, everything changed. The first sign that the humans were done waiting came not from their weapons, but from their communications. Every Nexari ship in the system suddenly found their command frequencies flooded with data, not jamming signals or electronic warfare, but something far more disturbing: complete technical specifications for every Nexari vessel, down to the location of their weapon systems, their bridge modules, and their reactor cores. How did they get this information? Thaxton demanded, staring at the flood of data that showed his fleet's secrets laid bare. His communications officer, a smaller Nexari with cybernetic implants covering half his skull, worked frantically at his console. Unknown, war leader, but they have everything. Shield frequencies, armor composition, crew quarters, even the location of your personal chambers. It's as if they've been studying our ships for years. The answer to how the humans had obtained such detailed intelligence would become clear only later. Dr. Marcus Webb, the human strategist who had planned what Earth called the final solution, protocol, had spent the past month doing something no one in the galaxy had thought possible. He had studied every piece of information about the Nexari that had ever been recorded. Not just their military capabilities, but their psychology, their culture, their history, and their weaknesses. Webb had realized something that the galaxy's other great powers had missed. The Nexari weren't just another aggressive species. They were parasites, creatures whose entire civilization was built on the conquest and consumption of others. They had no art, no science, no philosophy beyond the belief that might made right. They were a cancer that had been allowed to spread because no one had been willing to excise it completely. The humans had come to perform surgery at 0802 hours. Admiral Chen's voice cut through the static on all frequencies. Nexari vessels, you have exceeded the withdrawal deadline. You are now classified as hostile combatants in violation of Galactic Convention 847 regarding the protection of civilian populations, prepared to be boarded or destroyed. Faxon's response was immediate and furious. Attack. All ships, attack. Show these primitive mammals what happens when they challenge the Nexari Empire. The Nexari fleet, over 5,000 strong, turned toward the human formation and opened fire. The space between the two fleets lit up with energy beams, plasma bolts, and missile trails as the full might of the Nexari Empire was unleashed. It was a display of firepower that should have been overwhelming, a barrage that should have swept any opposing fleet from space. But the human ships didn't die. They didn't even seem to notice. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of her flagship, the TFS Retribution, watching the Nexari barrage splash harmlessly against her fleet's shields. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, their faces showing no emotion as they prepared to demonstrate what Earth had learned about warfare during their brief but bloody history. Defensive fire only, Chen ordered, her voice calm. Let them empty their magazines. Dr. Webb, are you recording this? Every shot, Admiral Webb replied from his position at the tactical station. The Nexari are firing at maximum rate, using their full arsenal. They're showing us everything they have. Good, Captain Tanaka, signal the fleet. Phase 1 complete. Begin Phase 2. Captain Yuki Tanaka, commanding the destroyer squadron that formed the human fleet's left flank, acknowledged the order and began coordinating the next phase of the human attack. But attack wasn't really the right word for what happened next. What the humans did to the Nexari fleet was closer to a dissection. The human ships moved forward in perfect formation, their shields absorbing the increasingly frantic Nexari fire. But instead of returning fire with their main weapons, they began launching something else. Small, fast-moving objects that spread throughout the Nexari formation like seeds on the wind. "What are those?" Thaxon demanded, watching the tactical display as thousands of small contacts swarmed toward his ships. "Unknown. War leader, they're too small to be missiles, too fast to be fighters. They're attaching to our hulls." The objects were human boarding pods, each one containing a small team of Earth's most elite soldiers. But these weren't traditional boarders coming to capture enemy ships. They were engineers, technicians, and specialists whose job was to do something far more devastating than any weapon. They were going to turn the Nexari fleet against itself. Within minutes, Nexari ships began experiencing technical difficulties. Weapon systems shut down, life support fluctuated, navigation computers began reporting false readings, and slowly, inexorably, the mighty Nexari fleet began to turn its weapons on itself. "War leader," his communications officer screamed, "The Crimson Fang is firing on our own ships. Captain Vexer is claiming his weapons are malfunctioning. The Bone Crusher just launched missiles at the Dark Vengeance. Half our fleet is reporting system failures." Thaxon watched in growing horror as his once mighty armada descended into chaos. Ships that had conquered worlds were now firing on their own allies, their crews trapped aboard vessels that no longer obeyed their commands. The human boarding teams had done something simple but devastatingly effective. They had hacked the Nexari computer systems and convinced each ship's artificial intelligence that every other Nexari vessel was actually an enemy. But the humans weren't finished. As the Nexari fleet tore itself apart, Admiral Chen gave the order for Phase 3. The human ships finally opened fire, but not with the massive energy weapons that most species used. Instead, they fired something far more precise and far more terrible, targeted kinetic strikes that disabled specific systems on specific ships. Tex, a Nexari dreadnought, would find its engines destroyed with surgical precision, leaving it drifting helplessly in space. A cruiser would lose its weapons, but retain life support, its crew trapped and helpless. A destroyer would find its communications cut, isolating it from the rest of the fleet. The humans weren't trying to destroy the ships, they were trying to capture them intact, along with their crews. "This is impossible," Thaxon raged, watching his fleet being systematically dissected. "How can they target our systems so precisely?" Dr. Webb, monitoring the battle from his position on the human flagship, could have answered that question. The humans had spent months studying captured Nexari technology, learning every weakness, every vulnerability, every design flaw. They had built their entire battle plan around the Nexari's overconfidence and their reliance on brute force over tactical thinking. The Nexari had expected a traditional fleet engagement, ship against ship, where superior numbers would eventually prevail. They had never encountered an enemy that fought the way humans did, with precision, patience, and an absolute determination to win at any cost. Asterisk. "This is impossible," Thaxon raged, watching his fleet being systematically dissected. "How can they target our systems so precisely?" Dr. Webb, monitoring the battle from his position on the human flagship, could have answered that question. The humans had spent months studying captured Nexari technology, learning every weakness, every vulnerability, every design flaw. They had built their entire battle plan around the Nexari's overconfidence and their reliance on brute force over tactical thinking. The Nexari had expected a traditional fleet engagement, ship against ship, where superior numbers would eventually prevail. They had never encountered an enemy that fought the way humans did, with precision, patience, and an absolute determination to win at any cost. Within 6 hours, the battle was over. The Nexari fleet, which had seemed so overwhelming just hours before, was now a scattered collection of disabled hulks drifting in space. Some ships had been destroyed when their crews chose to fight to the death rather than surrender. Others had been captured intact, their crews taken prisoner. But the vast majority had simply been neutralized, their weapons disabled, their engines destroyed, their crews trapped aboard ships that had become their prisons. Thaxon himself was among the captured. His flagship, the Bloodied Claw, had been one of the first ships to be boarded, its crew overwhelmed by human soldiers who moved with a efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. Now he sat in a holding cell aboard the human flagship, staring at Admiral Chen through the transparent barrier that separated them. "You fought well," Chen said, her voice carrying no mockery or triumph. "Your crews showed courage. What do you want?" Thaxon snarled. "Ransom, tribute, information about our other fleets." Chen studied him for a long moment, then shook her head. "We want you to understand something, war leader. Your people have a choice to make. You can continue to be a plague on the galaxy, conquering and enslaving and murdering, or you can become something else." "We are what we are," Thaxon replied. "We are conquerors. We are the strong, and strength rules the galaxy." "No," Chen said simply. "You were conquerors. Now you're prisoners, and strength doesn't rule the galaxy. Intelligence does. Preparation does. The willingness to do what's necessary does." She turned away from the cell, then paused. "Your empire has a choice, war leader. It can surrender completely, accept resettlement on reservation worlds, and learn to live peacefully. Or it can continue to resist and learn what happens when Earth decides that a species is too dangerous to be allowed to exist." The next phase of the human operation was something that none of the galaxy's great powers had expected. Instead of simply withdrawing after their victory, the human fleet split into smaller task forces and began hunting down every Nexari ship, base, and colony in the sector. They didn't just want to defeat the invasion of Krillian space. They wanted to end the Nexari Empire's ability to threaten anyone ever again. The hunting was systematic and thorough. Human ships appeared at Nexari outposts that had never been officially mapped, striking with precision and overwhelming force. Nexari fleets that had been preparing to reinforce Thaxon's invasion found themselves facing human task forces that seemed to know exactly where they would be and exactly how to defeat them. Within a month, the Nexari Empire had effectively ceased to exist as a military power. Their surviving ships had been captured or destroyed. Their bases had been occupied or demolished. Their leadership had been captured or killed, and their remaining population had been relocated to a handful of worlds where they would be monitored and controlled by human peacekeeping forces. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humanity accomplished in 30 days what the great powers hadn't even attempted in 3 centuries. The Nexari Empire, which had been a threat to civilized space for generations, had been removed from existence with surgical precision. In the Galactic Council chamber, Ambassador Zeph stood before the assembly once more, but this time he wasn't begging for aid. He was trying to explain what had happened and what it meant for the future of the galaxy. "The humans didn't come to help us," he said. his voice filled with wonder and a touch of fear. They came to solve our problem permanently. They didn't see the Nexari as an enemy to be defeated in battle. They saw them as a disease to be cured. The delegates listened in uncomfortable silence. Many of them had expected the humans to simply drive the Nexari away from Krillian space and then withdraw, as any civilized species would do. The idea that they would pursue total victory, complete conquest, and the effective extinction of an entire empire was something that none of them had contemplated. "What happens now?" asked the Altarian representative, her crystalline form flickering with anxiety. "What if the humans decide that another species is too dangerous to be allowed to exist?" Zeph considered the question carefully. Over the past month, he had spent considerable time aboard human ships, observing their crew, their methods, their philosophy. What he had learned had both reassured and terrified him. "The humans have a saying," he said finally. "They say that peace is not the absence of war, but the presence of justice." They didn't destroy the Nexari Empire because they enjoyed killing. They destroyed it because they believed it was the only way to prevent future atrocities. And if they believe another species is committing atrocities— Zeph looked around the chamber at the faces of delegates who had offered him sympathy and prayers while his people faced extinction. "Then that species should hope that the humans are feeling merciful," he said quietly. "Because the alternative is to discover what happens when Earth decides that diplomacy has failed." The human fleet had departed Krillian space as quietly as it had arrived, leaving behind only a small monitoring station and a simple message broadcast to the entire galaxy. "The Terran Federation stands ready to assist any species facing extinction at the hands of aggressive neighbors. We do not offer peacekeeping. We do not offer mediation. We offer solutions. Choose wisely, and across the galaxy, in the chambers of power and the corridors of diplomacy, a new understanding began to emerge. The humans had announced their arrival. On the galactic stage, not with grand speeches or diplomatic overtures, but with a simple demonstration of their philosophy. When they responded to a call for aid, they didn't just help. They fixed the problem permanently. The age of letting genocide go unanswered had ended. The age of humanity had begun. Asterisk.